Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. Let us consider the meeting of Dissertation Council for Voronova Elena Aleksandrovna defending a thesis submitted for the degree of Candidate of Science in Economics in the Specialization 0.00.10 Finance, Money, Circulation and Credit on the topic Logic and Principles of the Assessment of Financial Condition of Leasing Companies Open, according to the order of St. Petersburg State University from June 27, 2019, number 7231/1. I, Ivanov Victor, Doctor of Science and Economics, Professor, Head of the Department of Theory of Credit and Financial Management, was appointed Chairman of the Dissertation Council. And let me introduce my fellow members of the Council. Voronova Natalia, Doctor of Science and Economics, Professor, the Department of Theory of Credit and Financial Management. Motovilov Oleg, Doctor of Science and Economics, Professor at the Department of Economics of Research and Development at St. Petersburg State University. Leontieva Jamila, Doctor of Science and Economics, Professor, St. Petersburg State Economic University. And Zolotareva Olga, Doctor of Science in Economics, Professor, Polesky State University, Belarus, is remotely with us. Can you hear us? Thank you. Dear colleagues, according to Federal Law number 127 as of August 23, 1966 on Science and the State Scientific and Technical Policy, St. Petersburg State University received the right to independently award scientific degrees. The corresponding order on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, on the basis of which we conduct our council meeting, was issued on September 2016, number 6821/1, hereinafter referred to as the order. In accordance with the order, the meeting of the Dissertation Council is considered valid if at least 2/3 of the approved participants of the Dissertation Council, but not less than 4 people, take part in its work. Our council consists of 5 members. Everyone is present, including remote members. Member online, Olga Zolotareva. Thus, there is a quorum. I established the following rules for today's meeting of the Dissertation Council with a total duration of not more than 2 hours. The issues: a brief report by the chairman on the main content of the documents submitted by the candidate and their compliance with the established requirements. Question and answer session, 5 minutes. A brief report of the applicant's scientific degree reflecting the main provisions of the research, 15 minutes. Questions to the applicant based strictly on the report, no more than 2 minutes for one question. The answer of the applicant. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council with reviews outlining their positions, no more than 10 minutes for the speaker. Speech by the chairperson with their review, answers of the applicant to questions and comments of members of the Dissertation Council. No more than 15 minutes. Open discussion, speeches at the request of those present at the thesis defense with a brief statement of their positions and/or with specific questions and suggestions to the author strictly on the topic of the research, no more than 5 minutes for each person. At the same time, all those who wish to, please register in the registration form and introduce yourself before asking. The next point, the final answers of the applicant to the questions asked, in case there are. Speech by the scientific supervisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. Then there is a break with a 5-minute discussion before an open vote to reach a conclusion on whether or not to award a degree. At this time, broadcast is off. Next point, open roll call, counting of votes by the chairman with the results recorded in the minutes of the meeting. The decision to award or not to award a degree of St. Petersburg State University and the final word of the candidate, no more than 2 minutes. Once again, audio-visual recording of our meeting is being conducted as well as live broadcasting at the St. Petersburg State University website. Simultaneous translation from Russian into English or from English into Russian is being carried out. So proceed to the meeting. And our first point is Chairman's summary report on the document submitted by the applicant. This is by Voronova Elena Aleksandrovna, submitted for the degree of Candidate of Science in Economics in the Specialization 0.08.00.10 Finance, Money Circulation and Credit on the topic Logic and Principles and the Assessment of Financial Condition of Leasing Companies, was accepted for defense by the order of the Scientific Secretary as of June 27, 2019, number 7231/1. The Dissertation Council was approved by the order of the Scientific Secretary as of June 27, 2019, number 7231/1. And I, dear colleagues, have represented it to you before. The applicant submitted the following documents to the Scientific Secretary. Application addressed to the Rector of St. Petersburg University, Professor Kropachev, on the acceptance of the thesis for review and defense, filed May 13, 2019. Review from Kovalov Vitaly, scientific consultant, Doctor of Science and Economics, Professor at the Department of Theory of Credit and Financial Management, St. Petersburg State University. List of publications from 7 works which set out the main scientific results of the thesis, including 4 articles published in peer-reviewed scientific publications from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science, 1 article from the Web of Science and Scopus database. Fourth, certificate on the excellent results in candidates exam as of May 14, 2018, number 04A178, stating passing the exams in history, English, and specialization. In specialization 08.00.10, finance, money circulation, and credit, with the excellent results. Thus, all the candidate minimums are passed with the excellent results. Candidate's diploma of economics number 00285, issued in 2018 in St. Petersburg State University with specialization in researching lecturer. By the decision of the State Commission as of June 2018, she was given a qualification of researching lecturer. Hard copy and e-form of the thesis in Russian and English. The thesis is designed in accordance with the requirements of GOST. The thesis is printed on a copying machine with an indication of the output data according to GOST 70.4. It should be noted that all the documents correspond to Clause 12, Section 3, Representation and Defense of Dissertations of the Procedure for the Award of Scientific Degrees at St. Petersburg State University. Any questions, colleagues? No questions. Now let us refer to the short report of the applicant. Elena, you're welcome. Dear Council members, dear guests, I would like to present my dissertation on the topic Logic and Principles of the Assessment of Financial Condition of Leasing Companies. The development of the leasing market is being rapidly with 35% a year. As of 2018, the value of the leasing contract was more than 1 billion rubles, 1.8% of the GDP of the country, and it is necessary to provide opportunities to work, and it is necessary to invite investors through the most important banking credits. And while inviting financing, it is necessary to assess the financial condition of the leasing companies due to the specifics of their activity and due to their reports, because standard methods that are used in other fields are not applicable to the leasing companies. And in the domestic and foreign literature, this problem was not highly developed, though there are lots of works on the studies of leasing, but we can develop them in 4 different groups. The first one studies the essence of leasing. The second group studies the advantages over other types of financing of companies. Group number 3 assesses separate parameters, for example, liquidity, and so on and so forth. And group number 4, which is the most close, has the complex approach, but still all these works are combined with the primary transformation, but we think that it can influence the final decision of the creditors. That's why this defines the main goal of the dissertation, which is the assessment of the financial condition of leasing companies, determinations of the parameters and boundaries of the process. There are independent leasing companies which are the main subject of the research and who are interested in finding more new investors. The activity of the leasing company is very specific. Thus, the first stage of our research is the characteristics of their activity, which is studying the functions of a credit organization and the function that is only specific for this type of business. On the one hand, the leasing company is the same as the bank that is inviting cash from other companies. On the other hand, it is the corporate lender of the bank and thus has the functions of the financial mediator, and these characteristics can somehow torture the results of the financial analysis with the widespread coefficients that are applied for the analysis of corporate lenders in other spheres. Thus, the second result is the implementation and adjustment of the methods of analysis, autonomy of leasing portfolio. And it is necessary to highlight that traditional coefficients, for example, they do not take into account the financial streams of the leasing companies, and the payments received from leasing companies are being used for payments, for rate payments, for tax payments, and the margin, what is left, is not so high. That is, the permanent rate is extremely high. And what is more important for a leasing company, I think that's the ratio between the net investment and coefficient of financial liabilities before tax. An important part of the financial assessment of a company is the analysis of its financial activity, which shows the possibility to produce income and thus the attractment of international companies also depends on. And thus the risk management is also very important because the ratio in the market should be taken into account. And the extreme character shows the readiness to have extreme risks. That's why we would like to analyze profitability, and we use the following parameters: the net ratio, the net income, and at the same time coefficiency in its sense is the middle rate, and profitability coefficient shows the margin. And the fourth result is the type of diversification of the leasing portfolio of the company, because the leasing company is the mediator through the investment of the banking finance. The payment discipline depends on the subcontractors, and the concentration of the portfolio for the lenders shows the dependency, and thus it will be necessary to additionally analyze the credit risks. The situation is the same in the market. In case leasing portfolio is only focused on the special market, it means that the leasing company is influenced by the market environment, and we can understand how it is spread and disseminated in the regions. At the same time, with the medium level of the portfolio concentration, it still has its functions as the mediators, because it depends on the subcontractors. The main indicator for financial state is the volume of rates in payments. The first index in debts shows the debts in contracts, and it is calculated as the ratio between the debts with more than 60 days, when it is factually 2 leasing payments are backlogged. The reserved investment in leasing shows the possible losses that the company creates itself, whether the volume is reflected in financial results and capital. The fifth result is the identification of criteria which can be used for the financial assessment of a company, that we can make a conclusion of the financial condition of a company. We used for the analysis 44 leasing company. Among them, 14 companies are the domestic and 30 companies are foreign companies, and we use the open access sources and the diversification of their credit portfolio with 5 different creditors. That would prove the non-default state of this company, and with the appliance we could have calculated the corridors of different calculations. And here you can see in the slide the different corridors, and we didn't count the ratio in the market. The recommended ratio and the debts, they should correlate with the reserved investment in leasing. And we also took into account the market value through the Herfindahl-Hirschman method, and that was 25%, so that the portfolio can be identified as the diversified. As a rule, the financial of the leasing activity is either medium. It is necessary to identify the financial state of the company, not only for the past period, but we should be able to forecast it for the limit of credit, taking into account the possible situation in the market. Thus, the sixth stage is for the forecasting of algorithm, taking into account the market sensitivity and coefficient sensitivity. And this algorithm is used with the some possible results, the growth of the rates and the growth of bankruptcies or deteriorating of economical situation, and we can identify any situation for the analysis, and then we assess what has been received, and we can understand whether the company can struggle in the market. And in order to apply the results and with the analytical benchmarks, we have chosen the leasing company. It is in the focus group of the research. It is non-default corporate lender for more than 7 years. And this leasing company is universal, independent, and it has been present in the Russian market since 2001. It doesn't publish its reports in open access, and after analyzing the data from the company, we have identified that all the parameters comply with our research. Thus, it will allow us to identify this company as a good lender, so it would be positively assessed by the market, and it somehow shows the rightness of the boundary set, because this company is a non-problematic lender of a big bank. In conclusion, I would like to underline that the methods introduced in the dissertation, it allows us to assess the condition of a leasing company and analyze it for the future case, and the practical importance is also shown through the fact that the analysis has been introduced in a huge company in Société Générale Association. Dear colleagues, are there any questions? In one of the first slides, you have shown the report, non-traditional reports of the leasing companies. How do you differentiate between traditional and non-traditional? Under the term non-traditional, I meant that, for example, there is no index as the income, because it starts with the income rates only. For example, the profitability that is accounted with the income, we cannot calculate that because this parameter in the index is lacking, and all the main cash in leasing, they're on the balance of the leasing company, despite the fact that in Russian standards that should be made in compliance with the contract, and the major amount of cash is being shown in the balance. That's why, while assessing several parameters, autonomy coefficient, for example, we can have distorted results. That's why we underline this using the term. Professor Motovilov, the floor is yours. So you show the coefficiency of a leasing portfolio. Can you please identify why do you decide to introduce this coefficiency? It shows how the net investment is more than the net debt of the company without. And to a certain extent, it shows the stability of a company. And in case of a distress in the market, or the financial institutions are not ready to provide finance to the leasing companies, on the whole, the company can sustain through its own cash on the balance, and thus it can continue with the investment. Taking into account this index, you use the net investment index. How can you calculate that? It was pre-calculated by the company, and the method is the following. All the payments that the leasing company expects from its lender is discounted for the date of the report. Thus, the net investment is the leasing portfolio of a company. They are not if we outline the reserves, so that's the debit of the company. Thank you for a very good intervention, because there is a different approach. Because when we draw back, when we defact them, and we can compare the coefficiency with the debt, and if we see that this index is really high and there is no reserve, you can return the contract, and probably from the economic point of view it can be more sensible. And in your dissertation, I found some drawbacks, different terminology of the term reserve. How can you explain? Because there are several meanings of the term reserve. There are different definitions, and there are partially reserve when the company is making its reports, and they have different names. And in this case, we are talking about possible losses reserves on leasing contracts. Thank you. If there are any other questions, there are no questions. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. And now let us turn to the reviews. Professor Voronova. Dear colleagues, all present, I would like to outline the relevance of the research topic. Active development of the leasing market in the Russian Federation makes it necessary for leasing companies to attract bank financing to increase business volumes. Such necessity is associated with the problem of assessment by the credit institutions of leasing companies as a special type of borrowers. The importance of such problem is emphasized by the urgency of the dissertation study by Elena Voronova. Despite a considerable number of scientific researches in this field, many theoretical and practical aspects of the topic have not been adequately reflected yet and require systematization and development. Special demand for the research in modern conditions is provided by system analysis and situational analysis of current problems of the Russian leasing market, as well as planned changes, and presented in pages 47-52, as well as changes in the legislation in this area, pages 40 43. As for the degree of validity of scientific positions, conclusions and recommendations, the regulations and conclusions formulated based on the results of the work are convincingly grounded and based on an independent, honest and detailed study of the methodology of leasing relations, methods of assessment of the financial condition of leasing companies, on the approbation of assessment procedures. The author used a sufficient number of data sources. The list of sources includes 191 items, and this basis ensures the results of the analysis. As an additional positive characteristic of the work, it should be noted that it reflects the ability of the author to generalize, systemize, and very clearly present both the analyzed information and the conclusions drawn from them. The ability to carry out critical analysis and give a comparative characteristic of both the essential categories and scientific approaches, as well as practical manifestations, should also be considered one of the undoubted advantages. It concerns systematization of the process of appearance and development of leasing from the depth of time, characteristic of tendencies and prospects, which I can find most interesting of the Russian leasing market. And of course, there were the results obtained by the author. And we can include, first of all, revealing and systematization of specific characteristics of activity of the leasing company manifested in peculiarities of realization of operational, financial, and investment function in their aggregate and intertwining development of the system of methods of coefficient analysis and creditworthiness of the leasing company in the form of inclusion of the coefficient of autonomy of the leasing portfolio and the coefficient of serviceability of financial liabilities, and also at the expense of substantivation of the set of interconnected indicators of estimation of quality, revealing and substantiation of ranges of recommended values of coefficients offered by the author for use at estimation of financial condition of leasing companies, and justification and practical testing of the possibility of application of the analysis, the sensitivity of the proposed coefficients to expected changes in the market conditions as the basis for the algorithm of forecasting and stress testing of the financial condition of leasing companies, referring to certain pages. The listed scientific conclusions of the author based on the results of the research allow us to conclude that the thesis is of scientific importance, and the applicant has published 15 scientific papers, the value of which is in the development of scientific and practical approaches to the assessment of the financial position. The algorithm of stress testing of financial condition of leasing companies proposed by the author deserves special attention in this sense. The practical significance of the research is conditioned by the application of the provisions and conclusions available in the thesis to formulate recommendations to the development of Rosbank activities in the relevant field, which is confirmed by the certificates and the implementation of the result. Thus, it can be concluded that scientific provisions, conclusions, and recommendations available in the thesis are characterized by validity and sufficient reliability. Highly appreciating the work, however, it is necessary to know the discussion nature of some of the author's conclusion, as well as the presence of some inaccuracies that led to the presence of comments. In our opinion, it is necessary to draw a watershed between the concept of leasing and rent. It is not enough to define the subject. Special attention to systematization of features that distinguish leasing from the generally accepted understanding of rent seems to be somewhat redundant from the point of view of the thesis research subject. As the author itself rightly points out, this is more stylistic than substantive. Pages 13-15. It is difficult to agree that one of the reasons for the growth potential of the Russian leasing market is the low solvency of the clients. Page 53. The mechanisms, schemes, and instruments of leasing are intended to overcome the problem of insufficiency of funds for payments of property necessary for the clients of leasing companies to carry out their current activities. Thus, certain problems are quite obvious. IAS 17 standard does not so much provide the data necessary for financial analysis as the author mentions requires their provision. In the context of comparability of the relevant IFRS and RAS standards, we would like to clarify the situation with a new standard which requires that lease contracts be accounted for as of January 1st, 2019, it appears that the characteristics of a credit organization are not sufficiently substantiated for a leasing company to be endowed with the characteristics. In particular, the conditions and forms of raising funds by these economic entities, as well as the regulatory requirements for them in this area. Technical remarks include the following. The numbering of the pages in the appendices should not continue with the numbering of the pages of the main text of the thesis, and with the last page of the list of reference in this paper, it's page 155. Pretty enough for such a work. There are typos, for example. It's not so important though. And thus, the comments made are not of fundamental nature, do not affect overall high evaluation of the work, and do not prevent the high evaluation of the scientific qualification. The dissertation has an independent character, is executed on an actual theme, contains new scientific positions, conclusions, recommendations, which meet the requirements of validity and reliability, possesses theoretical and practical value, requirements to the publication of the main results of the dissertation research provided by the regulation on the awarding of the degrees approved by the government of the Russian Federation number 842 are taken into account. The research corresponds to the passport of speciality, finance, money, circulation, and credit on the following items: 3.11, 3.13, 3.20, and in general, this is by Voronova Elena Aleksandrovna on logic and principles of financial condition assessment of leasing companies meets the basic requirements set forth by the order on the procedure for awarding degrees at St. Petersburg State University, as amended by the order as of November 8, 2017, number 10886/1. The applicant Elena Aleksandrovna Voronova deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Sciences in the specialty finance, money circulation and credit. Clause 11 of the said order is not violated by the dissertation candidate. Thank you. Thank you for the review. The floor is given to Professor Matavilov Oleg Vladimirovich. The dissertation is dedicated to the methods and analysis of the financial condition of leasing companies. The author draws attention to the specificity of their activities, noting that this type of economic entities combines the features of both corporate borrowers and credit organizations. At page 124, it seems to be the statement that I find extremely right, that the estimation of the leasing company on the basis of the traditional coefficients is not quite expedient and correct, because such coefficients do not take into account the specifics of the leasing business and reflection of the leasing operations in the reports. It determines the necessity of the development of the existing approaches to the estimation of the financial condition of leasing companies, specification, the coefficients used for such estimation, taking into account the significant role that leasing companies play in modern economy. This task seems to be quite important. In this connection, the goals and objectives formulated by the author are actual, and their achievement has a high scientific and practical value. The goals and objectives of the research have determined the structure and content of the work, as the object of the research has defined the universal independent leasing companies which make the reporting in accordance with the international financial reporting standards and potential borrowers of credit institutions. It is for them that the issue of adequate assessment of the financial condition is of paramount importance. And I can agree with this. The first chapter of the paper reveals conceptual issues in the world and in Russia. The author at page 52 concludes on the existence of a mass problems complicating the development of such financial instrument as leasing. First of all, the author notes the conservatism of credit institutions in terms of assessing the financial condition of corporate borrowers, which makes it difficult for leasing companies to attract bank loans. The second chapter presents methodological approaches to the formation of the system. The author analyzed modern methods of assessment of its financial condition and also consistently considers the indicators of financial condition calculated on the basis, and as a result the author draws a fair conclusion at page 87 about the necessity to develop the parameters of the estimation of the financial condition of the leasing company, taking into account the specifics of its activity and given the results on the basis of which the creditor could make a decision on the provision of this or that leasing company with the borrowed financing. The third chapter contains the author's approach to the procedure of assessment of financial condition of the leasing company. The dissertation has substantial result and offered the algorithm of forecasting and stress test of the leasing company. Assessing the work in general, I would like to point out that this is an original study. The reliability of theoretical and practical works using the methods of studies. The author uses the legislative basis, the statistical databases, and it's important that all these approaches were tested in the Russian company, and there is also a certificate issued by Rosbank in the circulation of an international group, Société Générale, of which this bank is a part. And today we have discussed that the author has publications in international journals. The scientific novelty of the conclusions and dissertation research. The research conducted by the author allowed to develop the substance and the methods of assessment, and I would like to outline the following. I won't name the pages. First, approaches to assessment of profitability of leasing companies taking into account specificity of their income and expenses structure are developed. The set of interrelated indicators of assessment of quality and degree of diversification of leasing portfolio of the leasing company is offered. The ranges of the recommended values which can be used in the assessment of the financial condition of leasing companies, the algorithm of forecasting and stress testing of the financial condition of leasing companies on the basis of the analysis of sensitivity of the proposed coefficients to possible changes in the market. Acknowledging the undoubted advantages of the dissertation, we should also know the presence of certain drawbacks and remarks. First of all, page 4, the author notes that in the modern scientific literature one can find quite a large number of work in which approaches to the analysis of financial standing of leasing companies are considered. However, on page 86 contains the opposite statement. In the modern domestic and foreign literature, the problem of assessment of financial condition of leasing company has not been properly reflected. In paragraph 1.2, some inconsistency and incompleteness is noticeable. Thus, on page 30, the author notes that in the mid-90s, the main task of the Russian government was the active renewal of fixed access, implementation of which could be helped by the development of leasing. For this purpose, leasing companies with participation of the governmental structures were created. For example, Euroleasing was established. However, it happened in the period of the Soviet Union existence, and we were talking about Russia. Another example. In paragraph 1.2, the dissertation author considers the process of gradual formation of the state regulation of leasing and finally notes that in 1998 the State Duma adopted the federal law number 164 on financial leasing, which is in force up to the present day. However, I have to correct, because the 1998 law was adopted with the name on leasing, and the modern name of the law was given in 2002. And it was informal, and it showed a row of different changes. And I cannot agree with the definition of the concept of securitization of leasing assets at page 56. The author cites it with reference to the source, but as for the text, you can be solider with this. However, the essence is not information of some abstract portfolio by a leasing company, but in attraction of financing on the basis of issue of own security secured by future cash receipts under existing leasing contracts. Fourth, there are some minor errors, name of paragraph 2.1, modern methods of assessing financial of leasing companies, but a significant part is devoted to another issue, sources of financing. Table 2 does not contain a unit of measurement for a number of indicators. Table 14 shows that the service ratio of financial does not correspond to the recommended values. However, in the comments, it is noted that all parameters are within the acceptable limits. The short comments do not affect the main theoretical provisions, and practical recommendations in the course of the study does not affect the positive assessment. The thesis presented is written on a current actual topic. The conclusions are notable for the scientific novelty, reliability. The dissertation materials are presented in a clear and logical sequence. Conclusions can be applied in the organizations. And the author is a qualified specialist with modern methods of scientific research. Elena Aleksandrovna Voronova has submitted thesis which complies with the basic requirements established by the order as of September the 1st, 2016 on awarding degrees in St. Petersburg State University, and candidate deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in the specialty Finance, Money, Circulation and Credit. Paragraph 11 isn't violated. Thank you. Thank you, Oleg Vladimirovich. Now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Leontieva, Professor of State Economic University. Dear colleagues, I have studied the contents of the dissertation, and let me highlight the major points of my review. At page 135, Elena Aleksandrovna puts down the statistical data on the funds in Russia, 49% in certain spheres, health, 60%. And now I work with the energy and petrochemical companies, and there I can see that the percent is much higher, up to 80%. And in this case, the deterioration is the point of interest for the users and manufacturers, but the major problem is the lack of financing for both manufacturing and usage. And companies, they have to borrow loans on the one hand. On the other hand, the users who do not support advanced payments, but the credits can be taken not by all the companies. And here is the rigid assessment of the financial state of the company and the loans and the interest rates, guarantees. For example, not only guarantee for the return of the credit, there is also a necessity to provide guarantee for the quality. And it's a very expensive guarantee, 40% up to the equipment cost, and taking into account that one furnace costs 11 million euro, 4% is a huge amount of money for economic subjects. And that's why both manufacturers, they prefer leasing, because it allows to expand manufacturing and production and introduce new technologies. And in terms of practice and science, the actual character of the dissertation, it is about the stable financing for the sustainable development in terms of the non-payment character of its clients. And for this purpose, it is necessary to work out the tools of the economic subject that would allow us to make a decision on either borrowing a loan or not. And the solution of the problem has certain difficulties. That's the imperfection of the existing system and differentiation of leasing companies, specifics of the leasing activity, and lack of scientific works having multifaceted analysis of financial state of leasing companies, taking into account the specifics of their activity. The financial state of leasing companies should be governed properly through the analysis as well. And application of these methods, they have changed, and thus it somehow influenced the methods of assessment of leasing companies, and thus the contribution of Voronova, Elena Aleksandrovna, that she decided to take up this challenging topic of methodological approach towards the assessment of financial condition of leasing companies. And it is clear that the practical significance of the results is connected with the novelty and recommendations. The scientific novelty of the results is in the development and justification of methodological approach to the assessment of the financial condition of the leasing company, taking into account the specifics of its activity, which at the same time combines a number of characteristics of both the credit and the corporate borrower. The essential results of the dissertation include the following: identification and defining the characteristics of economic activity of the leasing company, combining the functions of a credit organization and the corporate borrower. A set of the interrelated of indicators of assessment of quality of degree and diversification is also offered. And I would like to mention the following. The approaches to assessment of profitability of leasing companies are developed, taking into account the specifics of their income and expenses structure, ranges of recommended values of the proposed coefficients which can be used in the assessment of the financial condition of leasing companies, the algorithm of forecasting and stress testing of financial condition on the basis of the analysis of sensitivity of the offered coefficients to possible changes of the market situation. Approbation of the main scientific results of the thesis was carried out in the course of the applicant's participation at Russian and the international conferences according to the results of 15 works. And there is also a certificate of implementation of the results into the real work. And the aforesaid allows us to conclude that are sufficiently substantiated. At the same time, it wouldn't have been a dissertation if there were no commentaries or interventions. In my opinion, in section 2.1, main approaches to assessment of financial condition of a leasing company, much attention is paid to sources of financing of leasing companies' activity. Thus, the author does not reveal interrelation between the source of financing and peculiarity of the approach to assessment of the leasing company's financial condition. Have the approaches to assessment of leasing companies been conditioned by the sources of financing? The research considers only approaches to assessment of independent leasing companies. Are there any differences with the governmental or fictive companies? The author does not reveal the interrelation, the difference in approach to assessment. At page 3942, the author refers to the draft law on amendments to certain legislative acts of the Russian Federation as regulating leasing companies and describes the planned changes in the regulation of leasing companies, and she notes the positive impact, gives estimated judgments to the regulation, and concludes that the transparency of the leasing market will increase significantly. However, at page 52, she indicates that the imperfection of the legislation is one of the problems slowing down the development of the leasing market, and says that the solution of the problem is crucial. However, returning to the description of the draft being implemented, pages 39-42, we can conclude that the solution has already been found and the problem is not relevant anymore. Isn't it a contradiction here? Is the problem legislatively solved? Anyway, these remarks do not detract from the scientific and practical significance of the thesis, and in general, the dissertation was carried out by the applicant independently at a high professional level, has a scientific novelty, contributes to the understanding of the financial condition of specific economic entities, and it corresponds to the basic requirements established by the order on awarding degrees, and the dissertation complies with the main requirements of St. Petersburg State University, and applicant Elena Aleksandrovna Voronova deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in the specialty Finance, Money Circulation and Credit. Clause 11 of the said order is not violated by the dissertation candidate. Thank you for the attention. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Olga Zolotareva. Thank you. The dissertation is extremely important and very crucial, and it is defined by the specifics of the leasing companies and the need to develop an adequate system of their management. The author rightly proceeds that leasing company is a special economic entity with specific financial flows, and it combines the features of a credit organization and the corporate borrower. The author has not only deeply considered the essence of leasing as the most important tool for renewal of fixed assets of various industries, the author clearly defines the purpose of the research, and the main advantages of the dissertation are the following: deep characterization of the essence of a leasing company, combining functions of a credit organization and the corporate borrower, is presented. Taking into account the specificity of the leasing company, the system of indicator of assessment of quality and degree of diversification of the leasing portfolio of the leasing company is developed. For each proposed and considered indicator, which can be used in the assessment of financial condition of leasing companies, new approaches to the analysis of profitability are also offered, taking into account the specifics of the incomes and expenses structure of the companies. And for each indicator, the criteria values are determined, and they can be used in the assessment of financial portfolio on the basis of the analysis of sensitivity of the offered coefficients to change of the market situation. Essentially, new algorithms of forecasting and stress testing of financial condition of leasing companies are worked out. If to get in deeper into the dissertation, the types of leasing are defined, as well as the differences between leasing and rent, the history of leasing, the perspectives of its development of Russia, and also problems which impede the development of leasing, the lack of insurance, the growth of rivalry, and the major problem, conservatism of banks. Elena Aleksandrovna, in the second chapter, she gives the solution to this issue: the necessity of creating a separate method of assessment, the methods is very modern and acute, and it is based on the financial reports and indexes of leasing companies, and there are criteria branches with the primary transformation, which take into account the specificity of the leasing and the indicators of their activity. The method assumes classification of parameters into three groups of indicators for the creditor in the different cases of the market environment, on the basis of sensitivity towards changes. And I think that the methods introduced proposed by the author allows to determine the current financial position of an independent leasing company from the creditor's point of view in the medium term, and to develop an adequate management system within the company. And in conclusion, the main points are formulated in the research, and they help to assess in the understanding of the dissertation. According to the results of the research, 7 scientific works were published, and 4 articles in scientific journals recommended by the Russian Attestation Committee, and there are also Web of Science and Scopus journal publications, and the dissertation and the practical value is shown through the certificate of the implementation of the results of the research and participation in international and Russian conferences. And I would like to say that the dissertation is highlighted with the logic, very good language, and it is very interesting to read that. However, there are some comments that should be mentioned. First of all, in the first chapter, the author writes that the abolition of the leasing classification in the law on financial leasing is justified since these categories, financial and operational, differ only in terms of accounting. The author further writes that such classification is the only correct one, and below gives a broad classification of leasing through various criteria. As a result, it was not possible to determine the position of the applicant on this issue. As the object of the dissertation research, the author indicates universal independent leasing companies that make reports in accordance with IFRS, potential borrowers of credit institutions. At the same time, it is not very clear why the methodology of assessment and analysis of financial condition proposed by the author is not suitable for captive leasing companies. Because the problem of choosing optimal sources of financial is not so acute for them, or because on the basis of consolidated financial statements of the group, it is difficult to receive information for calculation of offered parameters of estimation of the leasing company. It should be noted that the above-mentioned remarks whether the applicant points the equation mark between the leasing condition and the financial condition. Anyway, this does not reduce the quality, scientific and practical significance of the performed research. The thesis is quite logical, and the thesis is made on the actual topic. It represents an independent, completed scientific research that has internal unity and contains a new scientific result. Provision, conclusion, and results are fully justified and reliable. The content of the dissertation corresponds to the field of the research of the specialty, finance, money, circulation, and credit on the points 3.11, 3.13, 3.20. A dissertation meets the basic requirements established by the order on awarding degrees at St. Petersburg State University. Clause 11 of the mentioned order is not violated by the candidate, and Elena Aleksandrovna deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of economic sciences in the specialty finance, money circulation, and credit. Thank you. Thank you, Olga Alexandrovna. Now it is my turn. First of all, as for the acute topic, we have discussed this a lot, so I won't dwell upon this issue. It seems to me that the topic is quite acute, and now I would like to refer to the comments, and in my opinion, the results of the dissertation are conditioned by the clear logic of the work structure and the usage of the methods and statistical data that characterize the financial situation allowed the author to come to the following conclusions. In the midterm perspective, and to show the recommendations on governing the factors that define the state of the leasing companies. The thesis is a multifaceted scientific work in which the sequence of research from general to private conducted allowed the applicant to obtain a number of new scientific results, and they are conditioned by the clear logic of the work structure of the received conclusions and recommendations to the goals and objectives set in the research. And I would like to mention the most important results. First of all, the principles of assessment of quality and levels of diversification of leasing portfolio of leasing companies have been substantiated, page 82-86. First of all, they should include the principle of consideration of terms of indebtedness and overdue contracts in interrelation with volume of reservation of investment into leasing, the principles of assessment of lease portfolio diversification in the industry and geography, the statistical indicators characterizing creditworthiness of the leasing company are offered, namely leasing portfolio autonomy ratio, calculated as the ratio of net investment in leasing to net financial liability. The indicator characterizes the capabilities of the company to carry out its activities at the expenses of its own funds and demonstrates the safety margin, its creditworthiness. Financial liabilities servicing ratio, calculated as the ratio of profit before tax to interest expenses. Specific profitability indicators of leasing companies are justified, characterizing not only their investment attractiveness, but also the risks of the activities. That is page 80-81. The algorithm of forecasting and stress testing from the point of view of its financial stability. Pages 111, 90. Theoretical significance of the performed work lies in the development of the methodology of assessment of the financial condition of leasing companies, in the expansion of the understanding of the financial performance of leasing companies and the instruments to ensure their financial stability. In the applied aspect, it is necessary to outline the methodology of parameters estimation of financial condition of leasing companies proposed by the author deserves attention on the basis of criteria values of the chosen parameters justified by the author. The results of the dissertation research can be used in the educational processes of teaching disciplines in the field of financial analysis, assessment, and in the thesis there are debatable and controversial issues. The author tries to establish some connection of leasing companies and credit organization. In terms of the operations, both institutions attract funds with their subsequent placement at their own expense on the terms of payment, repayment, and urgency, page 125. Apparently, the author understands a credit institution as a bank in this case. This statement is more than controversial. It is well known that bank attracts funds from individual and legal entities for deposits on demand and for a certain period of time. Leasing companies do not have this right. Further, the bank places the attracted fund in their own name and at their own expense. Leasing companies do not place money but property in the form of tangible assets, which is transferred into temporary possession and used on agreed on terms with the payment of lease payments. Second, the author's assertion that the policy of the mega regulator in respect of leasing companies is aimed I quote, at a certain identification of leasing companies with credit organizations, page 125. It is very declarative. It is doubtful whether the author's approach to the creation of the leasing company for the reserves for payments under contracts where there is the breach of its obligation for a period exceeding 60 days is justified, pages 83-84, while recognizing the potentially irrecoverable receipts under such contracts. It is unlikely that all future payments under such contracts should be included in the reserve payments, given that the leasing company in this case has the right to withdraw the property with its subsequent sale or releasing for financial lease. It is hardly possible to agree with the author's assertion that the budget financing and financing at the expense of own funds are practically the same for the state leasing companies. Page 55. As the specified sources of financing have essential difference both from the point of view of directions of the use of the specified funds and from the point of view of control over their use, there are also editorial errors. In particular, in some cases the author writes profit and loss statement, in other cases the profit and loss statement. The critical opinion expressed in general does not reduce the overall favorable impression from the dissertation of Elena Aleksandrovna Voronova. It is written professionally and completely. Quite logically, with a consistent coverage of the advanced scientific position, result, and conclusion. The obtained research demonstrates the author's use of an original scientific and methodological approach to solving this scientific problem of great theoretical and practical importance. The subject and content of the dissertation corresponds to the passport of the scientific specialty 08.00.10 Finance, Money, Circulation and Credit in the following points: 3.11, 3.30, 3.12. Sources of finances of economic entities and problems of optimization of the capital structure. In my opinion, the thesis on the topic logic and principles of assessment of the leasing company's financial condition complies with the basic requirements established by Order Number 6821/1 on the awarding degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the applicant deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in Finance, Money, Circulation and Credit. Clause 11 of the said order is not violated by the dissertation candidate. So we have listened to all the reviews, and now Elena Aleksandrovna, please, can you answer? So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all the members for the constructive criticism which allow me to develop my research in the sphere of assessment of leasing companies, and I would like to comment as Natalia Stepanovna mentions the systematization of the features that distinguish leasing from the rent is criticized because there is more style than essence. In the paper, it is also argued that only correct classification of leasing into operational and financial. On the second question, we unequivocally agree that leasing is intended for overcoming the problem of insufficiency of means for property payments. However, as practice shows, at a part of clients of leasing companies, there are problems with repayment of leasing payments, and about this, payment discipline is considered, and the bad payment discipline of lessees and the market in Russia together causes the problems for realization of the potential of the Russian leasing market. As for the new standard, it has been noted that It came into effect in January 2019. As for the assignment of characteristics of a credit organization to a leasing company, this comment, I can totally agree with that. But in my paper, I tried to identify specific characteristics in combination of certain functions. For example, the leasing agreement in its essence is also a credit obligation of the lessee in that which is more targeted in nature. And a leasing company, similar to a bank, finances the activities of other economic entities by providing them with property. It also assumes the risk of solvency of the lessee. And in this paper, it is noted that, in fact, both types of organizations attract funds which subsequently finance the activities. And as for the remarks of the technical character, we totally agree with them, and we will take them into account in our future research. As for Oleg Vladimirovich Motovilov, I would like to express my gratitude for the criticism and pointing out the interventions that are needed to be taken into account. As I have mentioned in my report, this problem was not widely discussed internationally, despite there are lots of works and there are lots of international papers, but still it is not completely studied. So on the one hand, it is quite contradicting, but on the other hand, we does assess that the problem is not still studied deeply yet. As for securitization, we can agree with the opinion, but there is no assessment, as it is one of the modern sources tells us that it is one of the assessment points. As for the technical remarks and illogical and reports and typos, we will take them into account. As for the connection between the financial sources and the assessment approaches, here I would like to outline that there are two main points. First of all, because the bank credit is the most spread source of financing. That's why we focused our attention on this. But the banking one is the most spread. And in this case, there is a global problem of assessment. For example, when you use your own funds, there is no necessity in thorough analysis, and that's why we studied the existing sources, and the bank credit is to be the most well-spread one. And it is important because the results were implemented in the banking sector on the corporate clients crediting. As for independent companies, there are two major points that I would like to highlight. As for the captive companies, first of all, it's the issue of the reports, because the captive banking company is ready to provide the report on consolidated basis, and as for this basis, the analysis is very difficult with these methods because certain indexes are either distorted or lack, and the problem of financial for governmental companies is not that acute, because if the company, for example, is a part of industrial holding, it was created for certain functions within the holding, and these leasing companies, they do not have market agreements. There are only internal agreement, and the banking leasing companies are usually being financed through the mother bank, and there is no problem of attracting of banking financing. So there are certain departments within the bank group responsible for the leasing agreements. That's why we focus on independent leasing companies, and we also agree with the fact that it should have been noted more thoroughly. As for the changes in the legislation, it is clear that these changes will positively affect the leasing market, but the legislation is still being discussed, and we cannot guarantee that its implementation will be 100% positive and solve all the legislation issues, because we need some retrospective data to assess that. And despite the fact that there were several steps to solve the problem, we still consider it to be acute because we cannot assess the scale. As for Olga Aleksandrovna, as for your report, as for the classification and the predominance of the economic content of the lease over its form, for the purpose of both accounting and financial science, we consider such classification to be the only correct one. And however, in our opinion, there is no need to fix such classification at the legislative level. In our work, we also systemized the consolidate possibility variants of classifications proposed by the authors in the scientific literature. However, we do not express solidarity with these criteria and argue that it is expedient to classify leasing only in two categories, operational and financial. As for the notes on the fictive leasing companies, I would like to mention that captive leasing companies do not make the reporting under the IFRS on an unconsolidated basis, and there is no acute issue of financing. But still, the methods work out in the dissertation is quite universal, and we can use that to assess any leasing company. But it is necessary to take into account that from the point of view of analytics, we should modify certain parameters if we talk about not independent leasing companies, but other types of companies. And I can agree with Viktor Vladimirovich that leasing companies cannot use the deposits, and they use the tangible assets, and that's why we cannot compare that with the banks. As I have already mentioned in my other answer, we have identified the combination of characteristics, and we assessed the activity of a leasing company as the financial institute that finances the investment flows of the company, and we considered that it would be correct to a certain extent to somehow coordinate leasing companies with the banks. And the mega regulator policy is aimed at certain equations, and thus it helped us to find one more argument in our defense, because now we discussed the legislation on the changes on regulation of leasing companies, and there are certain changes in these institutions. For example, leasing companies will have to report according to certain principles. It is to be audited, it is to be sent to the central bank, and there are also requirements to the minimal capital, and there are also risk requirements, and thus we can make conclusions that the central bank is going to regulate leasing companies, and this regulation will be closer to that one of the bank. As for the future payments on the contracts, Viktor Vladimirovich, you are quite correct that the leasing company can remove the leasing property and further sell it. But we had a different meaning in this case, because the secondary market, the second-hand market, is not so well developed, and the removal and the realization of such property can be very difficult if it is not of high liquidity, or if it is specific, or it was harmed or lost. That's why a leasing company will not receive the same amount of the leasing volume if there were no violations of the payments. And we can either include them or not. If it is a universal company that leases vehicles and the liquidity of its portfolio is high, but in our opinion, it is better to include them because we will be able to assess the funds, and in case if it is appropriated and realized, the reserve will be restored, and this will be shown in the financial results. As for the note that finance of the funds of the governmental companies are not real sources, we can fully agree with that, and as well for the technical commentaries. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, among those present, there are no registered candidates. So now I would like to give the floor to the scientific supervisor of the candidate. Professor Kovalyov Vitaly Valerievich, Department of Financial Management in Pittsburgh State University. I have prepared a review which is also present on the website, and I would like to identify only certain points, because we have discussed the actual character of the work, and the logic and the structured character of the research is very well thought, and the practical material of the research is connected with the theoretical part. As for the validity of the scientific provisions and recommendations in the dissertation, all this is done through the most advanced methods of analysis and the corporate borrower assessment and the qualitative and quantitative methods and the analytical processing of the information. And during the work, the candidate has processed vast statistical data from the informational databases, and she analyzed and used several coefficients that allow users to get the information on the financial stability of the company. And the system of assessment can be a new informational benchmark in the financial stability of the company. As for the approbation of results, it was conducted at a high-profile level, and certain research were introduced as the practical recommendations in one of the systemic banks of Societe Generale. And as for the quality and quantity of publications necessary for the defense, it is all present, and it is all conducted with no violations. And I would like to highlight that during the research, Elena Aleksandrovna has conducted analysis of the problems of the assessment of financial condition of a company with the logic of the procedure, taking into account this specific features when we combine the elements of a borrower and the leasing company. And we can also identify that the author does not describe the problems, but the author gives the solution to this problem. And the general conclusion is that the dissertational work is an independent research dedicated to the problem on the assessment of leasing companies, and the work complies with the requirements by St. Petersburg State University to the candidate of sciences in economics, and Elena Aleksandrovna Voronova is to be awarded a candidate degree in finance, money circulation and credit. Thank you, dear colleagues. We go to the next part of our meeting. It is the open roll call. For this time, I ask you, first of all, to turn on the sound at the meeting broadcast, and I invite you, all the guests who are not members of the Dissertation Council, please leave the room. I invite Let's continue our work, and I raise the question of awarding a degree to an open roll call vote. I remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council on awarding an academic degree is considered positive is more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Dissertation Council who participated in the meeting voted for it, according to paragraph 23 of the Order of Awarding Degrees in St. Petersburg State University. Natalia Stepanovna Voronova, your opinion. I think that the dissertation by Elena Voronova deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of sciences. Matavilov Oleg Vladimirovich, your opinion. I vote for. Leontieva Jamila Gareevna. I go with the consensus and vote for. Professor Zolotaryova Olga Aleksandrovna, I vote for the award of the Candidate of Sciences degree in Finance, Money Circulation and Credit, and my opinion corresponds with the opinion of my colleagues, and I think that Elena Aleksandrovna deserves to be awarded a degree of Candidate of Sciences in Economics, Finance, Money Circulation and Credit. 5 members voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. And thus the decision was made to award the degree of Candidate of Science in Economics in the Specialization 08.00.10 Finance, Money Circulation and Credit. Elena Aleksandrovna, you are given the floor for the final word of an applicant. I would like to express my gratitude to the members of the Council for the time spent for reviewing my work. Dear Jamila Garevna, Olga Alexandrovna, Natalia Stepanovna, Oleg Vladimirovich, thank you for the attention to my work and your constructive comments and interventions that we will take into account in our future research. I would like to express my gratitude to Viktor Vladimirovich for his help and assistance, and thank you to my scientific supervisor for fruitful cooperation throughout several years, for his professionalism. And I would like to express my gratitude to Mikhail Lvovich Pyatov for his mentorship, for his assistance in any time and any question. Thank you for the organizers of St. Petersburg State University. Thank you a lot. Thank you for the assistance in all technical questions, and thank you to my family for their trust and support. Thank you all. Dear colleagues, the meeting is considered closed. Thank you for fruitful cooperation. Please turn off the broadcast of the meeting.